I guess we're going to get started. I guess I am on. I can hear myself now loudly. My name is Gisele Ragusa, and I'm a professor here at USC, and this is a presentation entitled, What Did I Read? Parents and Children Read Together, Important Interactions, Long-Standing Positive Consequences. So we designed our presentation both to talk with families about reading across the lifespan with their children, but also to talk to professionals, and so we hope that we will meet your needs. So we have 4 presenters, myself included. Our first presenter is Dr. Eugenia Mora-Flores, and she is an associate professor in the Rossier School of Education, and her expertise is biliteracy, early and adolescence literacy, and teacher education. Our second professor is Dr. Paula Carbone, and she's an assistant professor also in the Rossier School of Education, and she has expertise with adolescent literacy and lifespan literacy. And our third presenter, Dr. John Pascarella, is an assistant professor as well. And he has expertise in technology-mediated literacy and also does some work with the Annenberg School of Communications and is a assistant professor in the Rossier School of Education. As I mentioned, my name is Gisele Ragusa, and I'm a professor here in the Rossier School of Education, also in the Viterbi School of Engineering at USC, and my expertise is lifespan-related literacy and technology-mediated literacy as well. And so we're excited to have you with us. And the way that we're going to structure our presentation is that we're going to start by a brief presentation by each one of the panelists, and each panelist will introduce the next, although I've already kind of introduced them to you. And then I'll do the wrap-up at the end of my presentation, and then we'll have lots of times for a discussion because we really want to have time to discuss ideas, activities, and answer your questions. So we hope that you will make note of questions throughout our presentation. And at the end, feel free to ask them. No need to raise your hands. I believe we have mics somewhere in the room, correct, Kane? So that people can talk loudly. This room is not a huge room, but it is kind of like a tunnel. So sometimes we can't hear you in the back and you can't hear us. So let us know if you can't hear and enjoy the presentation. We're happy that you're with us.
All right. Hey, so my name, as Dr. Ragusa shared, is Eugenia Mora-Flores. And so what I'm going to do is take us through literacy in the home. And in many ways, before we actually begin formal literacy in school, whether it be preschool or kindergarten or whatever type of formal literacy program your children begin, I'm going to talk about the things you can do from the beginning in your own homes. And so the first thing I want to share is really the importance of oral language. And with oral language, it's key that you label the world around you with your children. So everything has a name. As opposed to saying it or that, if you're in the kitchen or in the bathroom or in the bathing your child or you're in the bedroom putting them to bed, it's about labeling and giving them the language for everything around them. So if they're taking a bath and you're scrubbing their arm, it's, let me scrub your arm now, not just scrubbing it, or I'll scrub your legs now. Or if you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, it's hand me the fork or hand me the knife. So the idea is that the children are building the vocabulary that they will use when they actually begin formal literacy instruction. So it's a real simple thing that you can do for your students, but it's actually extremely powerful, and it goes a long way for your children to be ready for the literacy that they're going to encounter in school. So just remember to label everything that your children are seeing and are exposed to, and you want to talk beyond the pronouns of give me it or give me that or give me those, but actually give it its name. And that's going to be a real critical piece for your children. And I'm going to show you a little short video at the end of my piece that shows you that in action and how kids take the oral language they've developed and start to use it when they read. The other tip that I have for you is just making writing materials available to your children at home. Any kind of writing materials, be it crayons or the Magna Doodles, paints, watercolors, computers, all of these are written materials. So if you just make them available, they're at hand, they're going to explore them. They're going to get their hands on them. And what you're doing when you do that is you give them the foundations of the work that they're going to be doing as writers later on. And again, it's something that seems simple, but just having those materials available will expose your children to the type of literacy that they're going to be asked to formally learn when they get to school. And so whether they're, just very, very young babies, there's her Magna Doodle, they'll grab it and they'll just start writing with it. And then eventually you're going to see your children starting to write out real words and and try to mimic the kind of writing they see you do. Another tip, and I didn't put it on the slide for you, is something that I do with my kids at home is we do a message board, and real simple, this is a dry erase, and I'll come out here. It's a real simple dry erase board, and so with your youngest children at home, just writing them a message and reading it to them every morning is really helpful. And so all I do is it can be a real simple thing, like I might just say to her, "Good morning, today you're going to the park." And today, and then what we do is we read it together, and eventually what you're going to find is they're going to start to try to read it on their own. And so what I have noticed, even with my own children, so we just write it, it hangs somewhere in her room, and my son has his too, and then I read it to them. And they will start doing it themselves. My daughter, she's actually here, she starts writing back to me. As early as when she was 3, she would see, because we were so in the habit of showing writing, she would just start writing back. And so it's really about making the materials available to them because they will explore them, as well as showing them all the, I'm going to go one more ahead. I'll come back to the other one. That how to use writing for real purposes. And one is to send messages, to relay information. And so that's what our message board is about in the mornings. And then the other is all the different things that you find around your house that you write, making your children aware of them. So whether it's a to-do list, and having your child see you write the to-do list, and as you finish those tasks, checking them off, or whether it's a grocery list, and your child is sitting there watching you write your grocery list, and then again, they get to help you check off the list as you go and take care of the different items needed at the groceries. And that was just an example of a message board. Good morning, beautiful. That's just an example there. But the idea is to help your child see real purposes in which people write. And so if you're writing at home, just invite them to see you do it. And again, if you have writing materials available in your house, then they're going to pick them up and explore them. So it's key that we give them the exposure to the kind of formal writing that they'll be asked to learn once they start school. So I'm going to back up a bit because the next one is going to be about, my last tip is really about reading with your children. And we know we hear often, read with your children, read with your children. But one of the questions I get from families is, what do I do when I'm reading with my child? I can read the book to them, and that alone is a great advantage. They hear the fluency of the read, they hear the story. But another thing you can do with your child too is what I like to call label or count what you're reading. So name all the items in the pictures. Count all the items in the pictures with them, because that is also going to not only build their oral language, but it shows them what print is all about. So I'm going to show you a real quick clip, and you'll see it's evident of he has had this book read to him many times, and you can see in the fact that he's pointing at the different trains that he's used to pointing at the pictures and being told what they are, as well as counting. We're always counting the images. So it's about 20 seconds long. It's not long at all. And what you're listening for is how he uses the oral language he has learned, as well as the technique of pointing at the images and labeling them when he reads. And eventually what will start happening is he'll start reading the words as he gets ready for formal literacy and be able to read on his own. But this is very, very early literacy in the home. And you'll hear him say things like caboose, because he's used to the word caboose. He caught on to that word. He'll say black, he says cities, and he'll say gone at the very end. So just a real quick glimpse of what that looks like. Hold up a second. Let me go ahead and drag. I'm going to start it there. All right? Here we go. The caboose. So lots of cabooses in that page.
Like a ball.
He'll come to cities, and then he'll say it's gone.
Cities.
Okay. So really the idea again, and it goes back to my initial point about building that vocabulary and the labeling. When you're reading your stories to your children, aside from reading the text, really pointing out the illustrations and labeling for them what all of those illustrations are, it helps build the vocabulary. Just to wrap up my piece, and then I'll be passing it over to Dr. Carbone, but it's really about, in those early stages, building the oral language and the vocabulary, having writing experiences available to your children, the writing materials, books at hand. And what you're going to find is when they get to school and they start to read, traditional reading, they'll have the vocabulary to read the words on the page when they get stuck, to know what they're reading as they're reading the words. So they're really early foundational skills, but they go a long way in them being able to be strong readers early on. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Carbone, who's now going to go into kind of beyond the early home literacy pieces, and now we're later on with adolescence and in school.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift more, as Dr. Mora-Flores said, to adolescent literacy. And the way I'm going to approach it is to talk about 3 myths that are very prevalent in kind of the popular media and the popular discourses around literacy. And so myth number 1 is that adolescents either can't read or don't read anymore. And in fact, what we see is that youth are probably reading more than previous generations. They're reading in varied genre, in varied texts. And so along with this myth, we have this critical time for adolescents when they're leaving elementary school and moving into middle school. And what happens at that point is a lot of things that we all know about adolescents. Their social lives change. But significantly for literacy, what they're being asked to read and write changes dramatically also. And the texts in middle school become much more dense and much more difficult. And so when I finish going through some of the myths, I'm going to come back to that point, that this critical juncture between elementary and middle school, youth are still reading and writing, but for their own purposes often. And getting those purposes to align with schooled purposes is what I'll talk about at the very end. But one thing is to find out what your kids are reading. What are adolescents engaging with? Who are they texting? Who are they tweeting? What are they reading on the internet? And there are a few examples on this slide. Also, what kind of books are they interested in reading, and help to promote that. A second literacy myth is that the reading that adolescents are doing for their own purposes are not going to be useful for school. And actually, the reading, the literacies that these adolescents are possibly engaging with outside of school can be very useful in terms of the skill sets that they're developing for school tasks. For example, maybe they're reading blogs, or maybe they're creating blogs. This is an incredible skill set of organizing information. If they're tweeting, they're using the skill set of synthesizing and taking a lot of information, putting it into a little bit. If they're texting, they're learning a symbol system that is different from standard English. So they're learning all these skills, and they have all these skill sets that possibly, with knowledge and mediation, can help them with some of the school tasks. And you can see on the slides that a lot of these things, the one on Facebook in particular, the headline says, "Children who blog or use Facebook have higher literacy levels." And I think that makes sense. And we see that with other of the literacies that they're engaging in. And the third literacy myth is that adolescents need the basics before they can read or write complex information. And this one is especially important because if you have children when they get to the adolescent stage, often when they have those demands made on them with more complex literacy, they may not be sure how to progress, and they may be placed in school in a placement that is putting them in a situation where their literacy is going to stagnate rather than be developed and nurtured. And so it's important that we all try and understand this, that they're already engaging in complex literacies. Perhaps not what they're being asked to do at school, but complex nonetheless. And I put a few things on the slide to show that. If they're, let's say they're creating a podcast, they're practicing formal speaking skills, most likely, that are necessary for school. They may be involved in fan fiction. They may be writing stories about characters in books that they like with other youth. If they're gaming, they may be using complex problem-solving skills. So they're really engaged in a lot of complexity, but it just isn't always recognized in school. So it's important that that's understood so that their school tasks can be promoted. And so there's a few recommendations if you are at the stage where you have adolescence, but if you're not, I see some of you with children, you will be eventually. But still engage with students. With adolescents. Find out what your kids are interested in. And even though they seem grown up, still engage with them. What are they reading? Ask them about it. Read those books. If they can predict the end of a movie or a TV show, maybe you're watching a movie on TV or you're watching a TV show, oh, that's going to happen, I know what's going to happen. That's a skill that directly transfers to a literacy in language arts, in reading a novel and predicting what might happen. So let them know what their skills are. You know, very often and I have had 2 adolescents, I survived and they survived, so I know that sometimes we tend to say, why are you wasting your time with that? Why don't you pick up a book? But I think if we understand the skills that are being developed and if we really take the time to talk to them and say, well, why do you like that series? Maybe they're into the Twilight series. Why do you like that? What is it about it? And really engage with them. If they're really good at a certain video game, how did you get to be so good at that? Because they have skills that if we tell them they're important, they can go into school and think, yeah, I have problem-solving skills. I'm not going to give up on this problem in math. I'm going to find out how to do it, just like I found out how to get to the next level in the video game or something. So I think it's very important that we value the literacies that adolescents are engaging with for their own purposes and make clear to them how competent they are in engaging with many of them so that they go into school with a feeling of understanding that they are skilled and that school tasks just may take a little bit more explanation, a little bit more time, and a little bit more specific stick-to-itness. So thank you. And now Dr. Pascarella is going to build on that idea with new media literacies and participation.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks for coming. 10 years ago, when I was first a student teacher down in Central Florida, I walked into a 5th grade classroom, and I started working with little 5th graders who were reading a text. I don't remember the text they were reading, but what I do remember is working with a particular group. There were 3 students in the group, and the reading specialist was coaching the students as to the correct interpretation of the text. of who the character was, what their motives were, what the character's purpose were, and how they were going to deal with the conflict. And so it made me think, and a few years later, Ken Robinson, who is a scholar in the dramatic arts, did a TED presentation online about our schools killing creativity. And it made me really begin to think about that moment and why I knew there was something wrong with a teacher telling or dictating what an interpretation of a text should be. It made me think of writers like Charlotte Bronte and the Bronte sisters and the world of imagination they lived in, and how they created stories from their use and play with toy soldiers. And they invented these stories and created little books, and they lived in their own little magical creative world. And it then made me think of other famous writers and authors who appropriated and took characters and conflicts from other stories that they had acquired as young people and turned them into something creative and new for themselves and made it their own. And so when I began to do my doctoral work, I started to become interested in HIV and AIDS education. I started working with rural school districts in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And I started using blogs with the students, specifically young adolescent women, who were beginning to open up and deal with some of the questions of the conflict dealing with in their own small rural community regarding gender violence and other issues. And so when they were able to talk about these things anonymously on a blog, they were able to open up and create and join in sort of a civic capacity in a community that they otherwise would not have been able to do openly because it was so culturally taboo to openly discuss those items. And so I'm trying to connect the dots. And so here I am, after finishing that study and coming and working at USC, I'm working with the Annenberg School of Communications and a media scholar named Henry Jenkins, who's written a white paper on participatory culture and what is it. And this term he first coined about 25 years ago in talking about the ways in which youth are now not only consuming media, but partaking in it and taking it up and creating things with it. And this is not a relatively new phenomenon, as I made earlier reference to other writers and scholars doing that. So what are the social skills in a participatory culture, and what does it mean to read now that students are evolving in these online environments and through their uses of mobile communication devices as adolescents? They're collaborating, they're participating in ways that perhaps we didn't necessarily were able to do as youth. They're playing and they're circulating media, they're sharing their works and their creations, they're networking, they're creating affiliations, and they're negotiating and navigating spaces in ways, in more sophisticated ways than they're perhaps able to do in their own classrooms. Okay, so a participatory model of reading really evolves out of the work of Henry Jenkins and others, who really first looked at the kinds of traditional literacy skills that are privileged in the brick and mortar setting, in the classroom school setting that your kids are typically exposed to, and began to look at some of the new media literacy skills they were gaining, like those I listed on the previous page. What he began to realize is that cultures were forming in these online environments, and they were mediated spaces by the members of those particular environments. And today I'm going to talk about two of those environments, fanfiction communities and multiplayer role-playing games. And we're going to talk about the literacy and practices endemic to those environments. Okay, so in the traditional model, reading and writing are traditionally considered separate. Participants are writers, but they're only done so after they've mastered the craft of reading and listening and speaking. And they're viewed as distinctly separate skills. Readers are typically are expected to master an established interpretation of a classical text. Literature is viewed as static and fixed and produced in a publishing house somewhere. Reading is a solitary constructivist act, and teacher is the expert of knowledge. Learner is the novice absorber of knowledge. And so a participatory model, in considering the new literacy practices of our students, and I'm sorry that's so bright there, it's hard to see. Reading involves other critical and creative processes in which the readers become producers of texts online. Reading is not limited to simply consuming a text and coming up with the right interpretation. Reading is now a generalizable skill that incorporates other critical and creative processes. I get to take up these characters and turn them into something else online because I'm able to do so through the environments online. Literature is considered fluid and dynamic and malleable, changeable, reflective of both the historical and contemporary conversations that go on around literature. People are taking up these characters, appropriating the conflicts, turning them into something else, writing entirely new chapters to texts like Harry Potter and new episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants and others. And so reading then becomes a social interactive space. And so when we see our kids at 10, 12, and 14 involved in these spaces, what I want you to consider is how you might encourage that participation, but also explore those sites for yourselves. Learn how their students are engaging in those processes. And in this way, both parent and teacher and learner are considered both experts and novices. So some popular fan fiction communities include MuggleNet, which is a fan fiction site for Harry Potter. There's another one, just fanfiction.net has several different threads that involve the Harry Potter series. SpongeBob SquarePants, obviously, is as many of you parents of young children know, is a cartoon series and has began to deal with all different kinds of complex social issues in their underwater environment. Kids are taking those up and they are rewriting those episodes. They are creating new homes and new relationships for SpongeBob and the other characters on the show. And they're mediating this space. They're judging each other, the quality of each other's episodes. They're giving immediate reactions. Sometimes they're one-liners. Sometimes they're entire paragraphs or new pages to the same text, and they collaborate and learn social skills in that way. Star Trek, any Trekkies in the house? Any Trek fans? Yeah. Star Trek is a whole universe of fans and characters, and I believe they have in Comic-Con every year, they have Trek people dressing up in character. And so again, allowing the audience, the reader, the consumer of the media to become a part of that narrative is really the intrinsic motivation to many students and kids' involvement in these sites. Another one is considering the multiplayer. It's actually a fancy word called MORGs. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games. Okay, and so a highly controversial one in which has over 12.5 million participants online. Something like 46% of them are between the ages of 12 and 18. And that's the World of Warcraft, where participants are creating avatars, creating characters, and they're engaging in these medieval tropes of enacting particular conflicts, joining particular guilds and clans, working together to collaboratively problem solve, enacting particular personas and identities that they otherwise wouldn't in the real world in their classroom setting. And so, as parents and teachers, and what we're seeing teachers doing as early as ages 8, 9, and 10, is begin to take up these particular skills, okay, that are enduring from these environments and use them in sociocultural learning strategies. That is, drawing from the ways in which students can interact with each other, set particular goals, and work together in particular traditional literacy practices. So, reading in a participatory culture means that particular skill sets are endemic to those environments. And I just want to go over some of the benefits of those skill sets. So we have developing and maintaining affiliations. We have producing and revising creative expressions. We have working together, collaborative problem solving. We have sharing and dissemination of their work and creative and various circulations. And I'm just about finished here. Practices of a participatory culture include reading is not only reading for absorption, reading is an act of identity development. Reading is collective knowledge building. Reading is appropriating and remixing ideas. Reading is negotiated, both negotiating cultural spaces and norms and identities, as well as values, practices, and beliefs. And reading is also visualizing, and I'm sorry it's impossible to see. Originally the backdrop was black. reading is visualizing strategies for navigating the structure of a text. And so the students are constantly helping themselves navigate what happened in the text, plot events and so forth, as well as coming up with new ones. And so I just very quickly wanted to emphasize that characters can be appropriated and reformed in these environments. Characters and themes can be derived from the original content and then reshaped. Communities are interacting collaboratively around a written text and work to revise each other's work. The participants aren't simply observing, they are also the characters themselves in online role-playing games. The communities are self-determined, cultures are formed, empowered, or lost, much like the real world. Collaborative goal reaching is often the primary goal in these environments. Social interaction and caste systems are created in these virtual worlds. And as well as reading skills, this involves architectural design, art, music making, and filmmaking. And so I wanted to share those with you as a way to extend the conversation that Paula shared with us, and also to introduce Gisele Ragusa. Thank you.
So far you've seen some really diverse perspectives of reading across the lifespan. And my job this afternoon is just sort of pull it all together and give you some tidbits both as parents and professionals. Many of you are probably playing both roles. I actually recognize some people in the audience who I know are parents but also are professionals in education and other fields. So my main message is to read with and to children and youth regardless of their age. And you heard from Paula this afternoon that a lot of times parents will read with their children when they're really young. They may not read with their children when they're tiny, like Eugenia's video, but they can and they should. In fact, there was a plug way back in the 70s to read while you were pregnant. Now, I actually did that. And I don't know that my kids became better readers as a result of that, but I do know that I read all of their lives, and they both are avid readers, so that's kind of an important piece. But certainly you want to start early with them, expose them to books. And it's not just about exposing them to books that you deliberately read to them, but model that reading for them, because that's really, really important for you. And again, as they get older, we generally read to elementary school students, and then when they get to be adolescents, we forget about that. They get busy, you get busy. But in fact, it's a time that you can really bond with each other, either through some of the participatory type of technology-mediated literacy or just simply with a book. And those kinds of things are really, really important. Also, you need to make sure that that children see you read. So whether you're a parent or a professional or both, every time you read, every time you pick up something, you pick up this, you write a shopping list, you go online and check your email, you pick up your BlackBerry or your iPhone and you read, every child around you is seeing you read. And each time you do that, they are getting a good model of reading. So don't forget that. It's really, really important. The other piece I wanted to make a plug for is our public libraries. Don't forget about them. Some people think they're sort of a dying breed. But in fact, with the advancements of technology, the libraries are advancing as well. And it's important to do that because those things are free. And it's kind of a nice place to meet and have some quiet time around literacy. They're all over the community. I encourage you to join the library. It's a nice practice. Children can learn about referencing and things that they might not typically learn with their parents when you take them to the library. Choose books that relate to and that are relevant for your children's lives and interests. And this is really critical because if something isn't relevant to them, they won't learn it. If you want your children to be lifelong lovers of literacy, then it's important that you choose things that are really important. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. You can choose books that are about their hobbies. So if they like sports or they like dance or they like Star Trek or whatever they like, you can choose books and other technology-mediated literacy from that. But you can also make trips and other kinds of activities that you have to do as a regular part of your life or that you do as a treat for your child, part of that as well. So one thing I always suggest to families is if you're going to be going on a vacation or a trip, you try to gather some books that would somehow relate to that trip. And with that, you create a situation that is mediated by literacy throughout the trek. So I can give you one example of that I did with my children, and my children are 28 and 24, and believe it or not, they still remember this, and I think they were 8 and 10. We went up the coast and then across to several national parks, and we read the book called Bury My Heart, which is the children's version of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which is a really controversial book. But the children's version is couched under the aspects of reality, but sort of softened reality and historical context. And we read that book as we went up the coast and across the western part of the United States, and they saw monuments, reservations, and other kinds of artifacts that directly related to what they did. When we go on trips, and when we went on trips, it's really terrific to also do some research online before they go. So you can find out if you're going to go to an area where the primary language is different than what they're used to speaking. What is the primary language? What kind of things do they do? What kind of authors were born in that country or that state or whatever? Those are the kinds of things that you can do with regard to literacy. It's really, really important to do that. What you really need to know is that you have to choose things that are important and interesting for students and make things important and interesting. One thing you can do is take pictures of things in their environment and link those to writing and have them make experience books. Now, a lot of people do that with young children, and they forget to do that with adolescents. With technology, they can produce a book on their own using technology mediation, and they should do that. Sometimes children have to experience something that's not so fun, like going to the hospital or something like that. And if you can make a book about what they can expect, it's sometimes less painful. So that's another really important thing to do. I wanted to give you a little bit of research on the importance of reading and engagement and learning. So we've done a lot of research on the role of motivation in learning, specifically tied to reading. And 43% of learning is actually related to motivation. So in other words, if kids aren't engaged and interested, they won't learn. About half of learning is linked to that. So it is really important. And as a parent and a professional, you play a serious role in taking that kind of information, mapping it onto reading and writing, and making sure that your children or the children that you work with are really engaged. Again, as our speakers mentioned, go beyond what's traditional reading and writing. Use the internet, newspapers, magazines, cell phones, believe it or not. The smartphones are terrific for reading now. Another means to read. The other day I was in the market and I saw a little tiny girl playing on an iPhone. And she was recognizing letters, etc., and she wasn't 3. So these kinds of things that we use to survive in our world can also be used for children. And it doesn't have to be a really fancy phone. Just anything that has any letters and numbers is also really, really useful. Today with technology, especially the internet, the notion of research has taken on a new meaning. While you do need to guard your children against some of the unfortunate things that occur on the internet, one way to do that is to participate with your child on the internet and to work with them in finding things that are fun and interesting, engaging, that are reading-based so that they can continue to learn. Those kinds of things are really critical. The new iPads and other kinds of things that have books on tape sometimes make it easier, more engaging for children to read because they have some live components where they can click on a picture and it comes to life and gets them more interested. The other piece that I think is really, really critical with regard to reading is making sure that you ask about what is going on at your children's school and then read and write about it at home and research about it at home or in the library. One way, particularly for elementary students and adolescent students, to stay connected with them is around literacy. Children, by nature, tend to separate from you as time goes on. It's very much a normal part of their development. But one way to connect back with them is around reading. Sharing a book is really, really critical. If your children get lost in books, in other words, they get so excited, they can't stop reading, and they might want to stay up a little late to do that, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So I encourage that. but not all night, of course. But staying up a little bit is really, really helpful in terms of helping them to get hooked on books. But again, writing back and forth to them is also critical. Eugenia talked a little bit about this notion of writing a little morning message. My son actually learned to read and write by virtue of using a journal. So he would write about his day with my mom who watched him. Then I would write back to him, and then he would write back. And over time, I saw him looking back at the old things that I had written and copying them and writing them, and then he began to write on his own. When children get older and they want to connect with you, but they want to be kind of a little bit incognito about that connection, emailing back and forth with them is really, really critical because they can feel safe in just talking with you, not in a large group or around their siblings, etc. But you can spend some time really texting with them or emailing with them or blogging with them in a sort of a private blog so that they can actually have some time to have a little bit of anonymity, but also be able to connect with you. And those things are really, really critical. As kids age, we know that we often begin to lose track of what they're doing, and they might have an experience that's really important to share with you, but that they're not comfortable without a little bit of anonymity. So emailing back and forth and using other kinds of technology are really, really helpful. So we've completed our presentation, but we really want to engage in a dialogue with you. So we're hopeful that for the next several minutes, you will have questions or ideas to share, and you will ask any one of us, because we really do want to have a time to meet your needs at this presentation. So anybody can start and ask any one of us about any aspect of what we talked about today or anything else you might have on your mind.
Hello. Hi, guys. Job Springer. I've talked to Dr. Mora-Flores about teaching your kids in a bilingual environment. And she's given me some tips on emergent literacy, but what kind of tips can you give us, my wife and I, when we eventually try to have children, to maintain that Spanish, English, the instruction all the way, with literacy developing all the way through your childhood?
So my colleagues, actually, just getting back to what I said earlier this afternoon, just a few minutes ago, who have adolescents who are starting to lose their home language in favor of the language of school or their peers, have engaged in some ongoing dialogues via email and text in which they ask their child to just write in the language of the home. So if it's Spanish, they would write in Spanish back and forth. And they've told me that sometimes the child will write in English, but they still respond in Spanish so that the reading still happens. The other piece is a pen pal from another area where there's a lot of the second language going on is really critical. I will tell you just a personal couple of stories. One way that I learned to continue to read and write in French is, I'm only about a quarter French, but my mother's from part of her family's from France. And as a young child, we were pen pals with our Parisian cousins, and we kept that up. And I still write to them. Actually, now we email and text. But that's how I learned to read and write in French. I also have a friend who is from Brazil, and her younger two children were born in Brazil, moved to the United States, but one of her children was born here. So her older children were born in Brazil, moved to the United States, but her younger child was born here. And we thought that little Amelia would not learn how Facebook in